It wasn't the bullet that scared me. It was the note tied to it. Leave now, or next time we aim for the horses. My name's Marcus Cole. I inherited this 20-acre ranch from my grandfather, a black World War II vet who bought the land when for sale meant to anyone white. Now, the HOA, led by a smug white guy named Greg, wanted me gone. Why? Because my kind didn't belong in their pristine neighborhood. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. Please listen to the whole story and give me a comment about your feelings. Started small. A fine for overgrown grass. My wildflower field. Permit denied for my barn repair. Then they cut my water supply. When I dug a well, they called it illegal drilling. But the final straw came last Tuesday. I found my dog, Duke, poisoned. The vet bill was $2,000. The HOA's message was clear. Starve you out or scare you out. That night, I drove to the county clerk's office. Paid $500 cash for a permit they couldn't deny. A gun range. Right on the border of my property and theirs. Greg's face when I unloaded the first shipment of rifles? Priceless. But he wasn't laughing when I hung the sign. Members only. Annual fee. One apology from the HOA. The next morning, Greg showed up with 2 police cruisers. Shut it down, Marcus, he said, pointing at the gun range signs. You're violating noise ordinances. I handed the officers my permit. Section 12B of the county code allows recreational shooting on private property between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. See the R next to my property line? That's the border. I'm not in your HOA jurisdiction. The officers frowned at Greg. He's right. Unless you've got proof of illegal activity. Greg's face turned red. You think this is a joke? Your range is encouraging violence. I smirked. No, Greg. It's encouraging paperwork. Every bullet fired here comes with a receipt. And a copy goes to the sheriff's office. That night, I found the second envelope. This time, it was a photo of my barn, circled in red. You're not just fighting the HOA, the note read. You're fighting the town. But I'd already dug deeper. The clerk at City Hall, a tired woman named Linda with kind eyes and a worn-out smile, had slipped me files after hours. She told me to be careful but insisted I needed to know what I was up against. The HOA wasn't just harassing me. They'd blocked 7 black families from buying homes here in the last year. Fake inspections, inflated fines, lies about structural issues. One family even lost their savings because the HOA claimed their credit score wasn't high enough. After they'd already moved in. And then I found the ledger. Greg's signature was all over it. $20,000 landscaping fees paid to a shell company. Zoning law changes backdated to block my grandfather's deed. I texted Greg. Meet me at the range tomorrow. 10 a.m. bring the board. When they arrived, I had the ledger blown up on a projector screen. This is your HOA, I said. And this, I pointed to the gun range's security cameras. This is your new reality. Every shot here, it's a subpoena waiting to happen. The board members shifted nervously. Greg stayed silent. Here's the deal, I said. You drop all fines. You apologize publicly. And you resign. Or I leak this to the Chronicle. Greg laughed. No one will believe a black man over us. I clicked a button. The screen changed to a video. Greg's voice, clear as day, saying, We need to keep this town white, whatever it takes. The room froze. Your call, I said. But remember, I've got nothing left to lose. After the meeting, I went home and sat on the porch. Duke lay at my feet, his ears twitching at every sound. They'll fight back harder now, I muttered to him. Duke whined softly as if agreeing. By midnight, the first act of retaliation came. A brick smashed through my kitchen window. Attached to it was another note. Last warning. I cleaned up the glass without calling the cops. By now, I knew better than to trust them. Instead, I installed motion-activated floodlights around the ranch. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure they were caught on camera. Over the next few days, the tension grew thicker. Neighbors avoided eye contact with me when I passed them on the street. Some whispered behind their hands. Others glared openly. Then came the rumors. Someone started spreading lies about me, calling me unstable, dangerous, a threat to the community. Flyers appeared on windshields. Marcus Cole is armed and unpredictable. But the flyers didn't scare me. What scared me was the silence from people who used to wave hello. One evening, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Thompson knocked on my door. "I heard what they're saying about you," she said, clutching her cane tightly. "Don't listen to them. My son served with your grandfather. He was a good man." Her words gave me hope, but not much. 2 nights later, someone slashed my truck tires. I replaced them the next morning, adding reinforced locks to the barn doors. By Friday, Greg had plastered flyers all over Oak Valley. "Marcus Cole is a liar. The HOA protects families, not criminals." Underneath was a photo of my grandfather's deed, altered to say leased, not owned. But I'd expected this. At 6 a.m., I'd emailed the Chronicle the ledger, the video, and a list of black families blocked by the HOA. By noon, reporters were camped outside Greg's mansion. The reporters weren't the only ones watching Greg anymore. By Saturday morning, half the town seemed to be gathered outside his house. Protesters held signs that read, "HOA racism must end," and "Justice for Marcus." A local pastor led a prayer circle, his voice booming over the crowd. Inside, Greg paced furiously. "They'll ruin everything," he shouted at his wife, who sat on the couch, crying quietly. "What do we do?" she asked. "We fight back," he snapped. That afternoon, the sheriff showed up at my door. "Marcus, you need to back down," he said, sweat beading on his forehead. "Greg's got the mayor on speed dial. They're calling this domestic terrorism." I stared at him. Domestic terrorism? For building a legal gun range. He shifted uncomfortably. "They're saying you're inciting violence, that you're a threat." I handed him a folder. Inside were 20 years of HOA harassment, fines for loud breathing, fake eviction notices, even a violation for my truck's tire tread. "You tell Greg," I said, "that I've got receipts older than his career." That night, the first bullet hole appeared in my barn door. Duke barked wildly, but I stayed calm. I'd installed cameras everywhere. The shooter was a teenager, Greg's nephew, caught red-handed on film. The arrest made headlines. Greg's face on the 6 o'clock news. This is about safety, not race. But the town wasn't buying it. At the grocery store, an elderly white woman squeezed my shoulder. "Your granddaddy saved my brother in the war," she whispered. "We're with you." By Monday, the HOA's lawyers had filed a restraining order against me. "Stay off HOA property," they said. I grinned. "Gladly, but you might want to check the border markers again." That weekend, I hosted a community safety day at the gun range, taught kids how to shoot soda cans, handed out free permits. Greg's wife showed up drunk, crying. "He's losing it," she slurred. "Says he'll burn the ranch if he has to." I gave her a water bottle. "Tell him to bring the matches. I've got cameras and a fire insurance policy." On Tuesday, the bank called. "Your loan's been denied," they said. "HOA flagged your account." I prepared for this too. Transferred all funds to a black-owned credit union. Greg was running out of moves. But then came the letter. Hand-delivered. No return address. Just a single sentence. "You're not the only one with a grandfather's legacy." And a photo of my mother's grave freshly dug up. I drove to the cemetery that night, Duke in the passenger seat. When I arrived, anger surged through me. Her headstone was shattered, the earth disturbed. "This isn't just vandalism," I muttered, kneeling beside the grave. "It's a message." Duke sniffed the ground, his tail tucked between his legs. "They're trying to break me," I said softly. "But they don't understand something." I stood up, fists clenched. "They've already lost." That night, I called Claire, the journalist covering my story, and sent her the photo of my mother's grave. "This ends now," I told her. She agreed. By Wednesday morning, the story was everywhere. National news outlets picked it up. Protesters flooded Oak Valley, demanding justice. Greg tried to respond. In a press conference, he denied everything. Marcus Cole is dangerous, he insisted. He's turned our peaceful community into a war zone. But no one believed him. That evening, I received another envelope. Inside was a map of my property. Every acre marked with an X. Beneath it, "You'll lose it all." I smiled grimly, because they didn't know what waited under those X's. The X's on the map weren't random. I'd spent months digging trenches under my ranch, literal and metaphorical ones. The trenches were part of a plan I'd kept secret, even from myself until now. Each X marked a spot where I'd buried something: water tanks, solar panels, generators, supplies to survive if they tried to starve me out again. But the biggest surprise was beneath the barn. It wasn't just a barn anymore. Claire's crew had helped me convert it into a media hub. Cameras, microphones, streaming equipment, all powered by solar energy. The HOA thought they could silence me, but I was about to make sure my voice reached farther than ever. By Friday morning, the whole town knew what I'd built. "This isn't just a ranch," Claire announced in her live broadcast from my property. "This is Marcus Cole's fortress of truth." Behind her, volunteers worked tirelessly. Some cleaned up the cemetery. Others repaired the barn doors Greg's nephew had shot at. A few set up tents for families who'd been pushed out by the HOA. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. Greg panicked. He called an emergency HOA meeting, invited only his closest allies. But I'd already hacked their email server, a trick I'd learned from a hacker friend back in college. Their plan was simple: frame me for arson, burn down the ranch, and blame me for it. They even had fake evidence ready: gasoline receipts, a witness statement from Greg's brother-in-law. I texted Greg, "Cancel the plan, or I release your emails." No response. So I did it anyway. At midnight, I uploaded the emails to a public server. Screenshots of their plans, their lies, their racism. By morning, the whole town knew. Greg resigned that afternoon. But it wasn't enough. On Thursday, I got another envelope. Inside was a map of my property. Every acre marked with an X. Beneath it, "You'll lose it all." I smiled grimly, because they didn't know what waited under those X's. That evening, I gathered a small group of trusted neighbors in the barn. "We need to prepare," I said, spreading the map across the table. "They're coming for us, and we can't rely on anyone else to protect us." "What do you mean?" asked Mrs. Thompson, leaning forward. "They've tried fines, threats, vandalism, and now they're escalating. If they think they can take this land, they'll stop at nothing." "So what's the plan?" asked Jamal, a young man who'd been evicted by the HOA last year. I pointed to the X's on the map. "These aren't just markers, they're defenses. Under each X, I've buried supplies. Water, food, tools. Enough to hold out for weeks if we have to. But we also need to be ready for retaliation." Jamal nodded. "What about weapons?" "I don't want anyone getting hurt," I said firmly. "But if they come armed, we'll defend ourselves. Legally. No violence unless absolutely necessary." The group exchanged nervous glances. "What about the cameras?" asked Claire, who sat quietly in the corner, typing notes into her phone. "They're our first line of defense," I replied. "Every inch of this property is monitored. If they step foot here, we'll have proof." By Saturday, tensions were reaching a boiling point. Neighbors reported seeing unfamiliar trucks parked outside town limits. Men in dark uniforms patrolling the streets at night. Whispers spread that Greg had hired private security to restore order. I didn't sleep much those nights. Instead, I walked the perimeter of the ranch, checking the floodlights and motion sensors. Duke stayed close, his ears perked for any unusual sound. One night, around 2 a.m., the alarms went off. I grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the noise. Near the eastern fence, 2 figures were cutting through the barbed wire. "Stop right there," I shouted. They froze, then bolted into the darkness. Duke chased after them, barking furiously, but I whistled him back. "No heroics tonight, boy," I muttered, shining the flashlight along the fence. In the dirt, I found tire tracks and a scrap of fabric caught on the barbed wire. The next morning, I showed the evidence to Claire. "They're testing us," I said, "seeing how far they can push before we break. And when they realize we won't break?" she asked. "They'll escalate." By Monday, the power went out across Oak Valley. Not because of a storm, but because I'd cut the HOA's electricity supply. Their main transformer sat on the disputed acre. Without it, their fancy streetlights, security cameras, and heated pools went dark. Neighbors cheered when they saw the blackout. About time someone stood up to them, one man shouted as he walked past my gate. Greg called me an hour later. "You think this ends with you?" His voice trembled. "You're making enemies you don't understand." I leaned back in my chair. "Maybe, but at least my enemies will know why they hate me." Then I hung up. The next morning, I woke to find 3 sheriff's cars parked outside my fence. Deputies stepped out, guns drawn. "This is your final warning," their leader said. "Shut down the range or face charges." I raised my hands slowly. "Go ahead. Arrest me. But remember, every cop car here gets filmed. Every charge becomes public record. And every headline reminds people what the HOA stands for." They hesitated. In that moment, I realized something. Greg had lost. Not just the fight, he'd lost control. But losing control didn't mean giving up. That night, I found another envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a court summons. The HOA had filed a lawsuit against me. They claimed I'd violated zoning laws, endangered the community, and caused irreparable harm to Oak Valley's reputation. The trial was set for 2 weeks later. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the summons. Duke rested his head on my lap, as if sensing my unease. "They've got money," I said aloud. "Lawyers, connections. What do I have?" Claire walked in carrying a stack of papers. "You've got us," she said, dropping the stack in front of me. "Witness statements, evidence, a whole town ready to testify." She pulled up a chair. "And you've got something they don't." "What's that?" "A story worth telling." Over the next week, we worked tirelessly. Claire and her team interviewed neighbors, collected documents, and built a case. Every day, more people joined our cause. A local lawyer offered pro bono help. A retired judge reviewed our evidence. But Greg still had tricks up his sleeve. On Wednesday, someone hacked my media hub. All the footage, the emails, the recordings, they were gone. I felt the weight of it hit me. Years of fighting reduced to nothing. Then Claire smiled. "Good thing I back everything up," she said, pulling out an external hard drive. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. Because late that night, I heard footsteps outside. Not just one person, many. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. "Who's there?" I called. No answer. But then I saw it. A figure standing near the gun range. Holding something. A shovel? No, a rifle. Before I could react, a shot rang out. The X's on the map weren't random. I'd spent months digging trenches under my ranch, literal and metaphorical ones. The trenches were part of a plan I'd kept secret, even from myself until now. Each X marked a spot where I'd buried something: water tanks, solar panels, generators, supplies to survive if they tried to starve me out again. But the biggest surprise was beneath the barn. It wasn't just a barn anymore. Claire's crew had helped me convert it into a media hub. Cameras, microphones, streaming equipment, all powered by solar energy. The HOA thought they could silence me, but I was about to make sure my voice reached farther than ever. By Friday morning, the whole town knew what I'd built. "This isn't just a ranch," Claire announced in her live broadcast from my property. "This is Marcus Cole's fortress of truth." Behind her, volunteers worked tirelessly. Some cleaned up the cemetery. Others repaired the barn doors Greg's nephew had shot at. A few set up tents for families who'd been pushed out by the HOA. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. Greg didn't show his face that day, but his lawyer did. "You're trespassing on HOA land," he said, pointing to the gun range. "We'll have you arrested." I laughed. Funny thing about borders. They can shift. And then I showed him the surveyor's report. Turns out the HOA had miscalculated their own property lines years ago. My grandfather's deed included an extra acre, enough to make the gun range legal. The lawyer turned pale. This changes nothing. It changes everything, I said, because now, you're trespassing on my land. That night, the power went out across Oak Valley. Not because of a storm, but because I'd cut the HOA's electricity supply. Their main transformer sat on the disputed acre. Without it, their fancy streetlights, security cameras, and heated pools went dark. Neighbors cheered when they saw the blackout. About time someone stood up to them. One man shouted as he walked past my gate. Greg called me an hour later. You think this ends with you? His voice trembled. You're making enemies you don't understand. I leaned back in my chair. Maybe, but at least my enemies will know why they hate me. Then I hung up. The next morning, I woke to find 3 sheriff's cars parked outside my fence. Deputies stepped out, guns drawn. This is your final warning, their leader said. Shut down the range or face charges. I raised my hands slowly. Go ahead. Arrest me. But remember, every cop car here gets filmed. Every charge becomes public record. And every headline reminds people what the HOA stands for. They hesitated. In that moment, I realized something. Greg had lost. Not just the fight, he'd lost control. The deputies left without arresting me. But the tension didn't fade. By noon, news helicopters circled my ranch like vultures. Reporters shouted questions from the road. Their cameras pointed at every move I made. Inside the barn, volunteers worked around the clock, setting up more equipment, organizing supplies, and preparing for whatever came next. Greg wasn't done yet. At 3 p.m., a convoy of trucks rolled into Oak Valley. Not sheriff's cars this time, private security. Men in black uniforms, armed with batons and pepper spray, lined up outside my gate. Clear the property, their leader barked. HOA orders. I stepped onto the porch, Duke by my side. You're trespassing, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. This land is legally mine. Touch anything and you'll regret it. The leader smirked. We'll see about that. Then they charged the gate. What they didn't expect was the crowd waiting for them. Neighbors, white, black, Latino, Asian, stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking their path. Some held signs, "Stop HOA bullying." Others carried shovels and rakes, ready to defend the ranch. The private security hesitated. This isn't your fight, their leader growled at the crowd. It is now, an elderly woman replied. She swung her cane like she meant business. For a moment, no one moved. Then Claire's voice cut through the chaos. Live on air, she yelled, holding up her phone. Smile for the cameras. The security team froze. One by one, they lowered their weapons. We're leaving, their leader muttered. But this isn't over. They climbed back into their trucks and sped away. The crowd erupted in cheers. But I knew better. This wasn't victory, it was a delay. That night, I found another envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a court summons. The HOA had filed a lawsuit against me. They claimed I'd violated zoning laws, endangered the community, and caused irreparable harm to Oak Valley's reputation. The trial was set for 2 weeks later. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the summons. Duke rested his head on my lap, as if sensing my unease. They've got money, I said aloud. Lawyers, connections. What do I have? Claire walked in carrying a stack of papers. You've got us, she said, dropping the stack in front of me. Witness statements, evidence, a whole town ready to testify. She pulled up a chair. And you've got something they don't. What's that? A story worth telling. Over the next week, we worked tirelessly. Claire and her team interviewed neighbors, collected documents, and built a case. Every day, more people joined our cause. A local lawyer offered pro bono help. A retired judge reviewed our evidence. But Greg still had tricks up his sleeve. On Wednesday, someone hacked my media hub. All the footage, the emails, the recordings, they were gone. I felt the weight of it hit me. Years of fighting reduced to nothing. Then Claire smiled. "Good thing I back everything up," she said, pulling out an external hard drive. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. Because late that night, I heard footsteps outside. Not just one person, many. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. "Who's there?" I called. No answer. But then I saw it. A figure standing near the gun range. Holding something. A shovel? No, a rifle. Before I could react, a shot rang out. The bullet missed me by inches. It hit the porch railing instead, splintering wood into the air. I dropped to the ground, heart pounding. Duke barked wildly, his deep growl echoing through the night. "Who's there?" I shouted again, my voice shaking. No response. Just the sound of footsteps fading into the darkness. I crawled back inside and locked the door. My hands trembled as I called the sheriff's office. "There's been a shooting," I said. "At my ranch." "We'll send someone over," the dispatcher replied, her tone indifferent. But I knew better than to trust them now. By sunrise, the town was buzzing. Neighbors gathered outside my gate, armed with whatever they could find. Baseball bats, kitchen knives, even garden tools. Claire arrived with coffee and updates. "They're trying to scare you off," she said. "But they've made this personal." I nodded. "They've crossed every line there is." Then we found the note. It was pinned to the barn door, written in bold letters, "Back down or bleed out." The crowd gasped when they saw it. "This isn't just about the HOA anymore," an older man said. "This is terrorism." Claire filmed the scene, her hands steady despite the tension. "This is why Marcus Cole is fighting," she said to the camera. "Because silence only makes them stronger." The video went viral within hours. By noon, reporters from across the country were calling. National news outlets picked up the story. Protesters drove in from neighboring towns, holding signs that read, "Justice for Marcus" and "End HOA abuse." Greg tried to respond. In a press conference, he denied everything. "Marcus Cole is dangerous," he insisted. "He's turned our peaceful community into a war zone." But no one believed him. That evening, the judge overseeing the lawsuit issued a restraining order. Not against me, but against the HOA. They were banned from coming within 500 feet of my property until the trial. Felt like a small win, but Greg wasn't finished yet. On Friday night, the power went out again. This time, it wasn't just the HOA's transformer. It was the entire county. A blackout stretched for miles, plunging Oak Valley into chaos. Neighbors flocked to my ranch, seeking shelter. The solar panels kept us running while the rest of the town struggled in the dark. "This place is a fortress," one woman said, warming her hands by the fire. "It's more than that," Claire added. "It's hope." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. And I was right. At midnight, a group of masked men approached the ranch. They carried torches and crowbars, their faces hidden under hoods. "Leave now," one of them shouted, "or we burn it all." The crowd around me tensed. "No," I said firmly. "You won't take this from us." Then I gave the signal. Spotlights blazed to life, illuminating the field around the ranch. Dozens of neighbors stepped forward, armed and ready. "You want a fight?" I yelled. "You've got one." For a moment, no one moved. Then the men faltered. One by one, they dropped their weapons and fled into the night. We'd won the battle, but the war was far from over. The trial began on a cold Monday morning. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even strangers who'd driven hours to witness the showdown. Greg sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he shuffled papers. I sat alone at the defendant's table. But I wasn't really alone. Behind me, the crowd was a sea of faces. Black, white, young, old. Some held signs that read "Justice for Marcus" and "HOA lies must end." Others simply watched, their eyes filled with quiet determination. Claire sat in the front row, her camera rolling. The judge entered, a stern woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "This court is now in session," she announced. Case number 4572. Oak Valley HOA versus Marcus Cole. Greg's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, he began. Marcus Cole has violated every rule in our community guidelines. He's endangered lives, disrupted peace, and refused to comply with lawful orders. The HOA seeks immediate eviction and damages totaling $1 million. The crowd murmured angrily, but I stayed calm. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. Your Honor, I said, this case isn't about rules or fines. It's about power. For years, the HOA has used its authority to target families who don't fit their idea of acceptable. They've blocked Black families from buying homes, fined elderly residents into bankruptcy, and destroyed lives, all under the guise of protecting property values. I held up the ledger. This is proof of their corruption. Fake inspections, inflated fees, backdated documents. And this, I pointed to the video screen where Claire had queued up footage of Greg's threats, is proof of their violence. The courtroom erupted. Order! The judge shouted, banging her gavel. Greg's lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. Witness after witness took the stand. Neighbors who'd been bullied, evicted, or silenced by the HOA. A former board member confessed to falsifying records. Even Joe, the cemetery caretaker, testified about the threats he'd received. By lunchtime, the tide had turned. But Greg wasn't ready to give up. In his closing statement, he looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, Oak Valley is a peaceful community. Marcus Cole has brought nothing but chaos and division. If we allow him to stay, it sets a dangerous precedent. Then he turned to the crowd. You think he's fighting for justice? He's fighting for himself. His words hung in the air. When it was my turn, I stepped forward one last time. Greg's right about one thing, I said. I am fighting for myself, but not because I want revenge. I'm fighting because if I don't, no one will. This isn't just about me. It's about every family they've pushed out, every voice they've silenced, every life they've ruined. I paused, looking around the room. I didn't ask for this fight, but I won't back down either. Because when you take away someone's home, you take away more than walls and a roof, you take away their dignity. And that's something no one should ever lose. The crowd erupted again, but this time, the judge didn't stop them. After hours of deliberation, the verdict came in. We find in favor of the defendant, the judge announced. All charges against Marcus Cole are dismissed. Furthermore, the HOA is ordered to pay restitution to affected families and dissolve its current leadership. The room exploded with cheers. Greg slumped in his seat, defeated. But the real victory came later. That evening, the town gathered at my ranch for a celebration. Neighbors laughed, danced, and shared stories of how they'd stood together. Someone roasted marshmallows over a bonfire. Another played music on a guitar. As I stood there, watching the joy unfold, Duke nudged my hand. We did it, boy, I whispered, and for the first time in years I felt free. Moral lesson: power corrupts, but courage can change the world. When people unite, even the strongest walls can crumble.